What is the most statistically improbable thing that has happened to you? 110 miles per hour combined speed head-on collision, no seatbelt, ejected and didn't die. I think I used all my luck on that one. Should have rationed it out better. I was in 2 plane crashes in the same day. I was returning from a long trip which involves changing planes 4 times, from float plane to small twin engine prop to small jet, then finally to a large jet home. Float plane was fine, but the small twin engine plane crashed on landing, running off the end of the runway and spinning into some trees. Next leg was also fine, but on approach for landing on the final leg the landing gears wouldn't deploy. They diverted us to a nearby unused airstrip and foamed the runway, and we belly flopped that bad boy down. As the pilot was explaining what was going to happen to us, the woman next to me was panicking and couldn't believe that I could just keep calmly reading my book. I looked her in the eyes and said, I've already been in 1 plane crash today. If that one didn't get me, neither will this one. The look of horror on her face was priceless and something I still chuckle about. Geez man, you're kind of a badass. My family and I were driving for 8 hours in northwestern India. We decided to stop for food at a little restaurant in some tiny village about halfway through, where we ran into our next door neighbors from the US who had rented their house to travel the world. One time, when I was going through airport security, the girl behind me pointed out that we had the same socks. The same mismatched socks on the same feet, same brand and everything, and same colors, everything. When I was 12 and MSN was a huge thing, I started talking to a 13-year-old boy who lived in another state. We became best friends over MSN and spoke on the phone every day. My parents split up, so my mum wanted to move. She moves to not only his state, but we end up being next door neighbors. Still best friends 6 years later. I am from Canada. I ran into someone I know, like actually bumped into them walking down a side street at 2 AM in a small town in New Zealand. At a baseball game, me, if the ball hits the foul pole, it's a home run, my friend. Doesn't it have to bounce into fair territory? Me, I don't think it matters which way it bounces. Crack, ball is hit, hits the foul pole, bounces into foul territory, is a home run. Us. Huh, well there you go. In high school in the 80s, a friend and I were wondering if there had ever been a one-armed drummer. About an hour later we heard that the drummer from Def Leppard had been in a car crash. I was out for a bike ride with my family in my early teens. I was speeding down a hill when my father, from behind me, yelled something that I didn't hear. I turned my head to look back as I was turning into a gravel parking lot. Instead of hitting the entrance to the parking lot, I hit the curb, mashing my wheel into a 3-stroke 4-pie shape, locking up against the forks of my bike and flipping me over the handlebars. I landed flat on my feet. No scrapes, no bruises. In 12th grade English in our final exam, the girl behind me had the exact same answers for the multiple choice portion. Everyone, not just right, but wrong also. I was called into the office in the summer to investigate it. They determined it was just blind luck as I didn't even know her and the desks were so far away from each other it would be really hard to cheat. Not to mention how dumb would you have to be to copy every answer off someone. I was in northern Thailand at a market. A tile leather crafter vendor had a bunch of vintage American plates as decoration. My Thai's horrible, as was his English. I pointed to a Michigan plate, showing him I was from Michigan. He kept saying something about his sister living in Michigan. He pulled out a letter from his sister. I live 6 houses from his sister in Grand Rapids. Not my story, but my in-laws. My Phil was serving in Guam. My Mill worked on the island. She is from Palau. Phil sought her in marriage, asked her dad. He refused. Phil headed back to the States. A few months later, he quit his job, sold all his possessions, and bought 1 ticket to Japan and 2 to return. He knew nothing of her whereabouts, if she was even in Japan or still in Guam, if she would leave with him, etc. Just a guy in love. He was determined. His very first night in Japan, he checked into his hotel and went to the bar to get a beer. My Mill was the hostess on duty. The rest is history. Crazy, sweet story. So I was in a really bad car accident in May, and as I was being taken away by ambulance, The ambulance gets in an accident. About 6 hours later, when I was released from the hospital, my mom was taking me home and, you guessed it, we get into another freaking car accident. None of them were our fault. I hate people. I also once chucked a marker across the room and nailed a fly 20 feet away that had landed on a desk. People saw it. Everyone cheered. Final destination crap right there. Mr. Grimm was trying to grab you. Mother was born with no optic nerve connection. 3 cataracts in each eye. She also was born with a rare blood disease. Father was born with holes in the valves of his heart and developed poor vision really early in life. Couldn't even walk a half mile without becoming fatigued. I have perfect vision. No diseases, disorders of any kind. Have run a multitude of marathons and enjoy extreme hiking to no end. I'll probably be screwed when I'm old though. Maybe both parents' issues were not genetic but due to other factors. If it's not in the genes, it can't be passed along. When I was in a music shop, I saw the CD of a band in which I knew the members. I pointed this out to the person I was with. They called balls. 2 seconds later I hear someone call my name and it's the lead singer of that band. We were not even in our hometown. This happened to me a few months ago, and it was pretty dang improbable. I'm walking through BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's the train station that takes you to and from San Francisco and elsewhere, where an average of 375,000 people pass through daily. I walk up the escalator to my train, and pass by an envelope lying on the ground. At first I didn't think much of it, but I took a couple steps back to pick it up anyways. The next part freaked me out. I looked at the address, and it was addressed to me. I instantly look around to see if it was a practical joke, or if I'm about to get assassinated or something. Neither of those were the case. The sender was a family friend. We'll call them the Johnsons. I knew that Mr. Johnson took the BART daily, but I had never personally ran into him. After work, I call him up and ask him about the letter. Turns out, he had about 300 letters with him on the BART, and was going to send them out for his daughter's graduation party. What in the world are the chances of him dropping the one letter addressed to me out of the 300, combined with the chances of me being the one out of 375,000 people to pick it up? Pretty wild. It would be 375,000. So yeah, pretty wild. Sorry. Not me, but my teacher from school. My teacher was a pretty reckless teenager, and him and his buddy would always hitchhike and go on random adventures. Well, one time, they got picked up by somebody random, and said teacher and friends started to get suspicious due to the routes the driver was taking, plus the vibe the driver was giving off was not very good. So when the driver wouldn't pull over and let them out as they requested, did what 2 young teenage boys would normally do and started beating the driver up till he finally pulled over. Years later, my teacher comes to find out that the driver was John Wayne Gacy. Met a girl at a bar in my hometown. The next morning, I caught a flight to Miami for work. That evening, I decided to go for dinner in South Beach. I was walking down the sidewalk when the same girl I met the night before in Vancouver was walking towards me. Neither told the other that we were traveling the next day. Always thought that was one of the most improbable events of my life. Denali National Park in Alaska is a huge nature preserve, bigger than all of Massachusetts, with no trails and just one road, with one bus that goes on the road, no other vehicles allowed. At the end of that road is probably the only commercial establishment in the whole park, a set of one-room cabins you can rent with a dining hall to serve food. It is so remote that everything is helicoptered in. I'm a biologist and was doing some field work in Alaska and decided to visit a friend of a friend who I knew was a staffer overwintering there. I made it to the empty camp and found her cabin, where she was talking to the owners, a married couple, and I assume the only other people in practically the entire park. I went to introduce myself, but the husband knew who I was. Turns out he and I went to high school together in the Northeast. Even though we hadn't seen each other in 15 years, he recognized me, but he looked completely different, and I was so confused as to how this could be happening. I was just silent. As luck would have it, he had just gotten his mail and was still carrying it. In it was our high school alumni bulletin, which happened to have arrived on that day. He showed me that with his name on the address label, and it all clicked into place. He then told me had bumped into another classmate of ours in the park a few months before, also doing field work as a biologist. He's serial killing old classmates, watch out. When I was in about 4th grade, I was hanging out in my garage throwing a tennis ball against the wall. One of my neighbor friends rode by on his bike and didn't see me, so I thought it would be funny to throw the tennis ball at him. 40 feet away, threw the ball and it ended up wedging in between the spokes of his front tire, abruptly stopping the wheel. He flew over the handlebars and broke his arm. Good shot. One time about 1991, a friend and I were using giant beach paddles, think oversized ping pong paddles, to hit a little rubber super ball around my room. I hit it really hard. It bounced off 3 walls and hit play on my tape deck. We heard You Got the Right Stuff by the New Kids on the Block play immediately and died laughing. Also, 12 years later, a friend and I were shooting a BB gun at a 2-liter bottle. My friend couldn't hit it all day. The one shot he finally hit, ricocheted and split my front tooth in half. At least you didn't shoot your eye out. Once I was playing Hold'em and I was dealt pocket aces 3 times in a row with a table of 9 people and managed to lose all 3 times. The chances of getting pocket aces is 1/220. Go figure. I once won 11 sprites in a row from a contest where there were prizes under the cap. Paid a $1.25. Got 11 sprites out of it. That happened to me too. I think I stopped at 7, but it was 7 sprites in a tow from the same gas station, in the same line in the cooler. I'd walk outside, open it, check the cap, chug as much as I could, then go back in and get another. My brother, who is 5 years older than me, bought a TI-86 graphing calculator in the 10th grade. I received this calculator when he finished high school and faithfully carried it throughout high school as well as my university career, which netted me an engineering degree. This thing was a more reliable friend to me than most people I have met, always solving my late night problems in the library and stood by me during early morning lectures. It saw me through all of it. So the calculator was now almost 15 years old. My final year rolls around. Final semester, final test, final minute. I press enter on my final calculation of university before I will receive my degree. Faithfully, my TI-86 answers the final question I have for it. It was glorious. 18.564 cubic meters. I will always remember that number. I finish writing the answer down, look back at my calculator and the screen is blank. Not an uncommon thing, some might say. It does run on 4 AAA batteries after all. But no, this was different. I had just changed the batteries before finals began. I knew my faithful companion had calculated all that it had to calculate. I let out a small whimper and said a quick goodbye, raised my head high, and he walked out of that test proudly carrying my friend's cold plastic body, and in my heart knowing he had given his life to let me start mine as an engineer. I was born. My mom was infertile. First of all, she had to be on fertility shots for 4 years. Then, I don't know all the details on this, but while she was at work, my mom started bleeding profusely from her hoo-ha. When she was taken to the hospital, the doctor was so sure that I couldn't have survived that he didn't even do an ultrasound test before deciding to abort my lifeless fetus. My dad went rage mode and threw the doctor against the wall. The doctor agreed to at least try the ultrasound before aborting me. Spoiler, I was still alive. Plot twist, you are actually dead. I unknowingly stepped on a plank of wood in the dark with a nail sticking up. Full on nail sticking out the top of my shoe stepped on. Somehow the nail managed to pierce directly between the base of my big toe and the next index toe. That's what I call luck. I'm not sure if this counts, but just my being alive came from a highly improbable meeting. My parents met in a supermarket. My dad was looking for contact solution. My mom was looking for vitamins. Neither of them lived in that neighborhood, but somehow both ended up at that store. They met in the aisle, started talking randomly, like strangers do. Just a little chat. The whole convo was maybe 2 minutes, maximum. They parted ways. My dad decided he wanted to get her number. Ran around the store looking for her, but she was gone. Oh well. His car was in the shop, so he walked a few blocks to go wait for the bus, which was late that day. He was sitting there, waiting, and my mom pulled up and asked if he wanted a ride. This is where my mom would always jump in when we were kids and say, but don't ever do that. She would have been heading in the other direction, but construction turned her down that street and she saw my dad and was like, frick it, he seemed nice, I'm going for it. He hopped in, got her digits, called her the very next day. They got married a year later and here I am. Clara Oswin, the impossible girl. I was on an airplane and I pulled a magazine that someone had left out of the seat back in front of me. I looked at the address block on it and it had the name of a guy that I went to high school with. I was goofing around in the kitchen with a couple of straws and decided to make a makeshift blowgun out of them. After raiding my wife's sewing tin for some pins, I had fashioned some crude yet effective darts with the addition of chewed straw wrapper. My son walks into the room, asked what I was doing, to which I answered hunting flies, then shot the dart at the curtains across the room. My son walks over, says holy crap, dad come look. I go across the room, and lo and behold, there is a freaking fly pinned to the curtain by my dart. A solid center of mass shot with a straw blowgun from 15 feet away. So, I did what any dad would do. I pulled the pin out, stage whispered gotcha, and mounted the fly on a piece of paper, which my wife threw out about 20 minutes later, the heartless wench. My girlfriend managed to match 2-3 numbers on lottery tickets for 5 days in a row. It's more statistically unlikely than winning the fricking lottery, but less satisfying. While in London, 5,000 miles from home, I left a restaurant and walked around the corner and literally bumped into a girl who was in my 5th grade class. Hadn't seen her in years. I moved to Texas halfway through 8th grade. I had come from Okinawa, Japan, and a year later a kid that went to the same middle school as me in Japan moved to my high school. It was crazy. Found a 1972 car license plate in the scrap metal bin at the dump. I took it home and hung it up with the matching plate I had found elsewhere years earlier. True story. I yelled to God in front of dozens of sucking classmates doing paid to make the rain stop. The rain stopped, the clouds opened and we were bathed in a glowing light. So, I got this party coming up, and all I have is water. This is my boss's story, but it's better than anything I got. He is from South Africa and moved to the United States after college. Many years later he is in Venice and he meets an old friend from South Africa. They are in a cafe and all of a sudden he sees someone that they both know and haven't seen in years, so he chases after him to say hello, catches up and realizes it's the wrong person. He apologizes and walks back to the cafe to see the person he was with, and on the way back actually bumps into the person he thought he originally saw. My first college roommate had some friends come visit. The college was in Portland. I was from Salt Lake City. When I was 15, my parents sent me sailing in the Sea of Cortez as a marine biology summer camp for a couple of weeks. One of my roommate's friends was one of the 3 other kids who'd been on that trip. Yeah, not using my main handle for this one. Due to a genetic lotto winning, I'm a functioning male with fully natural size FUK breasts that suffers PMS and cramps on a basically monthly basis. Not transgendered, not cisgender, male, with breasts, cramping, bloating, the lot of it. I don't have the flushing since I have nothing to flush. Breasts, depending on brand, between DDE and US sizing. I have had bigger breasts than all but one of my past girlfriends, and let me tell you, women love them. They aren't fat, nor are they implants. I occasionally experience spontaneous leaking, and they are quite sensitive. As per the PMS, I have a uterine-like prostate. I don't have a normal prostate. It means it produces the wrong hormone in the tissue. Conjecture by my doctor to explain some of what created me, and it responds to my hormonal cycle, which is not typical for a male. No testicles anymore though, they dissolved on their own. More accurately, stopped functioning entirely and atrophied away since the rest of my tissue was producing the wrong hormones. I have met all of one person who's had it worse than me, and they are now one of my closest friends. TLDR, I'm a guy, not transgendered, with natural breasts likely bigger than your girlfriend's, who has a menstrual cycle on menstruation. Sounds like heck. My wife happens to look at my birth certificate and notices that the address in my hometown where my parents lived when I was born is the same address of a duplex that my wife's mother purchased as a rental unit a year ago. We look at a photo of my dad holding me as an infant on the back porch and the same crack in the sidewalk is visible at the property now. My family never knew my wife's family until she and I met when I was 28. I traveled a few states away from home and saw several people that I knew. During high school, this family always went to the same vacation spots we did at the same time. Neither of us knew we were going. We'd see them and be shocked every time. How strange. Your parents were swinging with the other family's parents. I was watching a gif of Hugh Laurie cocking his gun, and at the same exact motherfucking moment the rap song I was listening to had the gun cocking effect. I still don't know why I deleted. Bored during deployment, so I decided to shuffle a deck of cards for solitaire while sitting on my cot. While shuffling I said something like 6 of hearts and I drew it. I remember looking at it for a second before putting it back in the deck, picked up a Maxim and went to the porta potty. Similar situation. Friend of mine shuffled a new deck and pulled out a card and told me to guess. I said 2 of spades. I got it right. He pulls another. I said queen of hearts and got it right. His eyes got really wide so he went for one last one. Got it right as well. After that my streak ended, though. Thought I was psychic for a good 45 seconds. I was at a minor league hockey game and there was a hot chick in front of me and I was imagining that a puck would fly over the glass and that I would grab it, save her, and she would fall in love with me. I was a nerdy high school kid. Anyhow, not 2 minutes later, the puck flew over the glass, smoked her in the head, and she was brought to the hospital. I didn't even try to grab it. I was 5 years old. My dad and his friends were drinking right beside the swimming pool where I somehow wandered into. I slipped on a beer cap, then I fell backwards and water immediately went into my lungs. I didn't know how to swim, nor do I know why the frick I went there in the first place. I was underwater for 10 minutes. I was only saved when one of my dad's friend went, "Hey, something's bubbling in the pool. Clifford, is that your child?" Apparently he's been looking at it the whole time, couldn't make out what it is because he was too drunk. I can still remember how the only thing I could see was a faint blue light and some bubbles. Scary crap. And that's the story of how I became aquaphobic. I survived cancer twice as a kid. Once when I was 1 and the second time when I was 2. Both times it was in my throat. It was caught early and the cancer was removed both times. Now I am healthier than ever and it has never made an effect on my life. Also, I am 19 years old now. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.